Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. A recently published book has an astonishing set of details and revelations which are not just surprising but even worrying. The first concerns the Indian Army's decision to ignore and disregard critical intelligence about Chinese troop movements in Ladakh in 2020. The second is a detailed account of what happened in Galwan on the 15th of June 2020 when 20 Indian soldiers died. These are revelations that have been made public for the first time in this book. And here it is. It's called Understanding the India-China Border, the Enduring Threat of War in the High Himalayas. And its author is the well-known and highly regarded strategic affairs expert, Manoj Joshi. Manoj Joshi, I want to focus on some of the astonishing but also disturbing things you reveal about the India-China border clashes in Ladakh in 2020, which simply haven't got the attention they deserve. First, there's the Indian Army's response to exercises that China was carrying out in February-March 2020, some 200 kilometers from the line of actual control. You write, and I'm quoting you, all countries make some precautionary deployments when a neighbor conducts a military exercise. However, on this occasion, citing COVID, the annual Indian Army ITBP exercise, which takes place in Depsang in March, was postponed. Your book suggests this was a mistake and COVID was not a sufficient reason for postponing the exercise. Am I right?
Absolutely. The problem is, if the other person is exercising, what you have to worry about is the other countries' exercise. COVID was a given in the circumstances. So there should have been precautionary measures taken. Whether the ITBP exercise itself would have been sufficient, of course, is another matter, because that is only up in Depsang. The Chinese transgressions took place all the way down to Demchok. So yes, certainly they should have taken all the precautionary measures, particularly because they had the intelligence.
In fact, I'll come to the intelligence in a moment's time, but you're suggesting a very important thing. Not only should they have taken precautionary measures because China was carrying out exercises 200 kilometers from the line of actual control, but the exercises that got postponed in Depsang might not have been sufficient. They might have needed to do additional exercises elsewhere rather than cancel what was planned for Depsang. So there's a sort of double mistake here, cancelling and postponing Depsang and not taking additional measures elsewhere.
Absolutely. See, the thing is that under the 1996 agreement between India and China, we are committed not to have exercises more than 15,000. That's roughly about division. We are encouraged not to exercise near the line of actual control. We are committed. And we should not exercise in the direction of the neighbor. Number two, all exercises beyond 5,000 men, which is a brigade, you require to give pre-notification. Now, I wonder whether the Chinese gave us any pre-notification of the exercise.
And if they didn't, that's another reason for us to have taken precautionary measures rather than postpone what was anyway planned.
Oh, of course. No doubt about that. No doubt about that.
Now, as your book points out, worse was to follow. It seems intelligence that the Chinese were moving their forces towards the line of actual control was ignored by the army. You write, and I'm quoting you, when the Chinese began to move some of these combat forces westwards towards the line of actual control, the Indian army did not pay heed, even though they had received intelligence reports regarding their movement. Now, at this point, this begins to sound a bit like irresponsibility.
Well, what can one say? The fact is that the Tibetan plateau is very easy to surveil, and we conduct surveillance routinely. So first of all, your satellites, your special aircraft that fly along the border, they pick up all this. And they would have picked up the concentration of the Chinese forces. All the photographs would have been there. The electronic intelligence would have been there. All that would have been there. And secondly, they would have also picked up the movement. All these are parts of, military intelligence. So they would have picked it up. And so, therefore, to not react because, we have April. On 9th May, we have a scuffle in Pangong. And on 14th May, the army chief Naravane tells reporters that these are temporary, short duration face-offs and they're kind of routine. Where area people have overlapping claims. And the same day, the MEA spokesman says that India and China border has been largely peaceful. This is May.
But the important point you're making is that there were critical elements of intelligence that the Chinese forces were moving towards westwards, i.e. the LAC, and this intelligence was ignored by the army. So not only did the army postpone and cancel exercises, which, as you've already said, they should have actually been conducting because the Chinese were conducting exercises and they need, as you said, to take precautionary deployments of their own. But in addition to postponing and canceling exercises, they also then ignored intelligence that the Chinese were moving westwards towards the LAC. This is a sort of double act of irresponsibility, it would seem.
My own view on this is that now, as I told you, there is no way in which all this would not have been right there on the table of the army people, meaning the satellite pictures, the electronic intelligence, all that from late March, April would have been there. The real failure, and this is not something which happens to India alone, it happens to many countries, was in assessing that information.
I'll come to that in a moment's time, but first let me ask you, you're absolutely critically sure that the intelligence was available and disregarded, because that's the point you make. The Indian army did not pay heed, even though they had received intelligence reports regarding the movement of Chinese soldiers westwards towards the LAC. You're absolutely sure this intelligence existed and was disregarded?
Of course. There is no way in which this intelligence could not have existed. If it didn't exist, the failure is hugely greater. Because, we have a whole...
But can I clarify? Are you saying there's no way the intelligence couldn't have existed? That is an assumption that it did exist. Or are you saying it did exist and was ignored? Because the second is a stronger one.
No. I'm saying it did exist. All I'm trying to say, raise a hypothetical thing, saying that if it didn't exist, the Indian failure would be greater by many degrees. See, because this is a border which we surveil on a daily basis.
But let's not go into hypotheticals. Since you're absolutely certain it did exist, let's stick to that line.
Yes,
if it did exist, it was disregarded. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, it was disregarded.
Now you go one step further. Again, I'm quoting you because this one step further is again even more disturbing. You write, on 5th May, concentrations of Chinese troops had appeared near the Galwan Valley and Gogra-Hot Springs area in the Kugrang River Valley. But even now, the Indian army had not appreciated the seriousness of the threat. Now, this is becoming almost inexplicable. What possible explanation could there be for this?
See, that's the thing. That's what General Naravane was saying, that this is on the line of actual controls. These kind of things happen. So as I said, that this is really a failure to misassess. They just did not assess what the Chinese were up to. We didn't have that. See, and this is the critical thing in intelligence. You can have all the intelligence, but if the intentions are something which are very difficult to discern. And I think the Chinese intentions, and because the Chinese had cloaked it in a kind of deception, and when I say deception, and that's part of intelligence of any statecraft, that at the end of 2019, you'd had a major summit between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. Okay, everyone had talked peace. That they were talking of the reset in Sino-Indian relations, and how things were going great guns for the two countries. This is at the end of 2019. So now in 2020, when China moves, I would say it's a pardonable assumption on the part of the army that they think, this is something which has been happening in the past. 2013, we had Chinese appearing in Depsang. So this is part of the thing. So here was a critical misassessment on our part, and the Chinese pulled one over us.
Let me quote what you write. The problem was not the lack of intelligence, but its assessment. Now tell me, this failure to assess intelligence, which you are absolutely certain was available, this failure to assess it, is it complacency or is it failure to apply their mind? Did they not think through what they had?
You see, this is where the skill of an analyst come in. When intelligence has two parts, one is the collection of intelligence, the second is the analysis of that intelligence. Now, in India, we don't have a proper separation of the two. And the problem is that the bias of the collectors often goes into the analysis. So we need much stronger group of people analyzing the intelligence. And I'm afraid that is where the big failure took place in assessing Chinese motives, in analyzing what exactly they were up to.
Okay, so what you're saying, and I'm just summing it up for the audience. We took, or rather we failed to take precautionary deployments when we knew the Chinese were exercising 200 miles from the LAC. Then we had intelligence which we disregarded. And even as late as the 5th of May, when the Chinese forces had appeared, as you say, near the Galwan Valley and the Gogra-Hot Springs area in the Kungrang River Valley area, even then you say the Indian army had not appreciated the seriousness of the threat. This, therefore, is a pretty critical failure to analyze and assess the intelligence. It was there, but we didn't understand it and we didn't assess it. And that's correct, isn't it?
It's absolutely correct. It's absolutely correct. And all I can say is that it's almost a replay of what happened in Kargil in 1999.
Now, in fact, you go one step further. In a sense, this is your conclusion. You write, and I'm quoting you, though the Indian side accused the Chinese of breach of trust, in reality, they had been caught napping. You're clearly saying the army has to shoulder a fair amount of the blame.
The army and the intelligence services.
Both the army and the intelligence services on the Indian side have to shoulder a fair amount of the blame.
Absolutely. And this is a repeated pattern as far as India is concerned. And this the problem that occurs when no one is made to pay a price for it, meaning nothing happens thereafter.
Now, the net result, as you point out in your book, and I'm quoting you, is that by the end of May, China was controlling 1,000 square kilometers more of Ladakh than it had been at the beginning of April. And you then further point out, this does not take into account the entire Kungrang River Valley and the Charding Nala area, which could have added another 1,000 square kilometers to the total. I have a very simple question. How much of this could have been averted? How much of this land might not have been lost for patrolling purposes if the army had A, not cancelled or postponed its exercises, and B, taken the intelligence it had more seriously?
Well, certainly, I think the the roughly 950 square kilometers in Depsang could perhaps have been averted, because we were talking of that precautionary exercise that would have taken place in Depsang. You see? So it's entirely possible that those 950 square kilometers, that blockade that was established there, could have been averted. As far as the other blockades are concerned, I'm not that certain about that, because these blockades occurred in different places in the Kograng, PP15, PP16, PP17, 17A, in these areas. In Pangong, 60, 70 square kilometers was denied. In the Charding Nala area, much smaller area, 4 or 5 square kilometers.
But you're saying up to 1,000 square kilometers that India lost the right to patrol over could have been averted. Could have been averted.
Oh, absolutely.
Intelligence had been taken seriously.
Well, I've not said 1,000. I've even speculated that it could have been. It can be as much as 2,000 square kilometers.
It could be as much as 2,000 could have been averted the loss of.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Let's at this point come to Depsang before I come to your very dramatic and detailed account of what happened in Galwan on the 15th of June 2020. I'll come first to Depsang because we are talking about Depsang. Now, the Indian position, as confirmed in February 21 by Lieutenant General Y.K. Joshi, who was the Northern Army commander, is that Depsang is a legacy issue and predates the Ladakh border clashes of 2020. However, and this is the important part, you quote Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, a former commander of 14 Corps, who's written in the Journal of the Vivekananda International Foundation that a minimum of 8 to 10 patrols per year from 2013 to 2019 visited patrolling points 10, 11, 12, 13 in Depsang. And you add, I'm quoting you, reports suggest that the last Indian patrol to visit the area may have been in January, February 2020. Now, if you're right, and if Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma is right, the claim that Depsang is a legacy issue seems like an attempt to pull the wool over our eyes, because we were clearly, as Lieutenant General Sharma says, sending 8 to 10 patrols per year from 2013 all the way to 2019, and you believe that the last patrol was as recent as January, February 2020. So we can't claim it's a legacy area if we were patrolling in January, February 2020. Therefore, the claim it's a legacy area sounds like an attempt to pull the wool over the Indian people's eyes.
Well, General Joshi was not the only person doing that. In September 2020, Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh gave a statement in Parliament, and he recounted, that Pangong, So, Gogra, Hot Springs, Galwan. He didn't mention Depsang. And yet, the largest, most consequential blockade that the Chinese established was at Depsang, because that is preventing you from patrolling over 950 square kilometers. So the deception ran through the government. And even now, I find very few statements where the word Depsang occurs, in government statement. They talk of Pangong, they talk of Galwan, they talk of other areas. Depsang, there's silence. And that because I think they may have convinced themselves that it's a legacy issue. But then, as General Sharma has shown, it is not a legacy issue.
So, in fact, the attempt to claim it's a legacy issue when quite clearly it's not a legacy issue was not just an attempt made by Lieutenant General Y.K. Joshi, who was Northern Area Commander, but you're saying it was even made by the Raksha Mantri.
Yes, definitely. The Raksha Mantri just ignored Raksha Mantri and the government. I mean, they even now they have not told us anything. We do not know from any government statement what is the situation in Depsang.
Let me sum up what we've discussed so far before I come to that dramatic account of what happened in Galwan on the 15th of June 2020. What you reveal about the Army's complacency up to May 2020, its decision to postpone exercises when those exercises were most needed, its inability or failure to assess intelligence when the intelligence was clearly telling them that the Chinese are moving westwards towards the LAC. And also what you've told me now about Depsang. Both of these do not show the Indian Army or the Modi government in a very good light. Would you agree?
Oh, of course. Meaning, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Meaning, this whole pattern of obfuscation. Meaning, you know that, of course, you said you will discuss Galwan later, but the prime ministerial statement on Galwan kind of summed it all. He said, no one has come in and no post is lost.
This is the statement the Prime Minister made in June. I think the date was the 19th of June. Yeah, 19th, but no one has entered our territory. No one is on our territory, if I recall his statement correctly. And as you're saying, that was patently untrue when he said it.
Untrue. And thereafter, down the line, meaning right through the government, there has been a very peculiar position. You know, whenever these issues are discussed, what are talks that we are holding, friction points. You know, these blockades have been euphemistically termed as friction points, but they are nothing else but blockades because they prevent you from patrolling to the extent that you were patrolling.
Absolutely. So you agree that everything that we've discussed so far does not show either the army or the Modi government in a good light. This is an subject and an issue and an area where both failed to do what was required of them, assess accurately and take the right response.
And also be open about it. See, okay. Because what has happened is, because they've been fudging issues, the Chinese have been taking advantage. They're saying, well, if your Prime Minister is saying that no one has entered your territory, okay, so let's go a little bit more. So that's why you have what happened in Tawang.
Okay. Let's now come, Manoj Joshi, to what I call your dramatic account of what happened in Galwan on the 15th of June, 2020. You start your account in May 2020 when the Indian Army found Chinese border guards blocking their access to patrolling point 14. That was in May 2020. You say on the 6th of June, Indian and Chinese generals met, and you write, the Chinese seem to have accepted that this was clearly on the Indian side of the LAC. Can you then, from that point, take the story further?
Well, again, what transpired in the talks themselves, there are a matter of speculation, but everyone agrees that thereafter, a pattern of disengagement was agreed to. That is on the 6th of June. And General Naravane himself is on record, saying that 12th of June in Dehradun, he said that everything is under control. A lot of disengagement has taken place, and we have started from the north in the area of the Galwan River. So 12th of June, he said disengagement is occurring. Now, 13th June, he repeated this, that disengagement is occurring in the Galwan area. But Colonel Santosh Babu, he was the local battalion commander there. They had been told that the Chinese had removed an observation tower and 2 tents they had pitched at PP-14. But Colonel Babu was told that so the dismantling was taking place, and he had met this Chinese counterpart at Chi Pao Bo. And then came reports that the Chinese once again put up their tents and rebuilt the observation tower. So Colonel Babu apparently got an earful from his brigade commander saying, "Why do you check out, see what's happened there?" So he reached PP-14 maybe half an hour before sunset on the Monday, the 15th. Okay. And at some point, the Indian side apparently they set fire to the Chinese tent, and they were razed to the ground. And there was an altercation, became violent, and by now it was dark and freezing, and suddenly Chinese reinforcements arrived. And they set upon the Indians with stones, clubs, and a furious hand-to-hand battle took place. Hand-to-hand brawl occurred. At some point, Colonel Babu fell. He was hit by a stone, and I think he fell into the water. Now, there was a lull for an hour, and the soldiers recovered his body. By now, Indian reinforcements had arrived, and so there was more, man-to-man fight going on. And a third phase of the brawl began that continued till midnight. Only after 5 hours of this brawling did things calm down. Now, the point I'm making is all this account is from various newspapers, various reporters, etc. The government has yet to give us a straightforward account of what happened. Okay.
Can I just at this moment clarify something, because I think it's very important. You're saying Colonel Santosh Babu was hit by a stone and then fell into the river. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what one of the accounts suggests.
And that's what you've been reliably told.
Yeah.
And you're also saying that there were 3 phases to the brawl that took place in Galwan, and all 3 phases lasted for a total of 5 hours.
Yeah.
And
yes.
During the brawl, the Chinese first reinforced themselves, and then the Indians did that a little later.
Indian did that later, but the Chinese, by that time, you see, it was pitch dark. It was pitch dark. That's the other problem. And where the brawl was taking place in that kind of with a flowing fast river next to you, which direction it was going, where it's going, I don't think anyone really has a comprehensive idea of that. But we know at the end of it, definitely 3 Indian soldiers, including Colonel Babu, had died. Because as I said, Colonel Babu's remains were fished out of the river, and they took him away at some point. But 2 more Jawans had died, and the Chinese have acknowledged 4 of their people dying. But thereafter, through the day, the government acknowledged that 17 other people had died.
I'll come to the deaths in a moment's time. But the other important thing about your account of the 15th of June 2020 is that it began as a result of what I think would be Chinese deception. They agreed to remove their observation tower and 2 tents. Apparently, they did so, and Santosh Babu, Colonel Babu, went to verify, and at that point met his Chinese counterpart, Colonel Shi Fabao. Then, having verified that the Chinese had removed their tents and observation tower, he got information from his higher commander, the brigade commander, that the Chinese had gone back on their word and re-erected the tower, re-erected the tents. So the cause of the brawl was an act of deception by the Chinese. They went back on their word. Having agreed to remove something, and then having been verified that it had been removed, they went and reinstalled it.
Well, I'll tell you, Karan, that was not the only deception. The Chinese should not have been where they were. In 1960, during the official level talks, they had given us the precise latitude and longitude of where their claim line crosses the Galwan River. And that point is at least half a kilometer away from where the Chinese were. So the Chinese had intruded into Indian territory. They should not have been there.
That's another very important point. The clash in Galwan on the 15th of June happened, you're saying, quite clearly on Indian territory. There's no doubt about that.
Yes, there's no doubt about that.
And the Chinese also, you're saying, in the talks they had with the Indian generals on the 6th of June, accepted that this was, and I'm putting you clearly on the Indian side of the LEC. The Chinese themselves had accepted this was on the Indian side.
Well, the Chinese response is somewhat peculiar. As I said, what happened in the talks is a matter which has come out second-hand and third-hand. But subsequently, there were some Chinese statements which drew a completely new picture of their claim in the area. They said they claimed the entire area.
Absolutely, but that was later. But I'm quoting from your book. On the 6th of June, you say the Indian and Chinese generals met.
But they agreed to the disengagement. They agreed to the disengagement, which means that they were in the wrong place.
Okay. Very quickly, because we're coming to the end, we know that 20 Indian soldiers died, but you reveal perhaps over 150. That's a very large number. Perhaps over 150 were injured and perhaps 100 taken captive by the Chinese. And you believe the captives included a lieutenant colonel and 3 majors. How sure are you of these details?
Well, this is the about the rank of the officers caught, the numbers. These are all things which you piece together. Meaning, I've pieced together from sources. There are pictures in the Chinese Weibo, but there are also domestic Indian sources. They talk of anywhere between 100 to 150 prisoners, definitely. And as far as the rank of the officers is concerned, I'm not so certain about that, because but very recently, just last week, the Chinese had put up another video showing an Indian captain confessing to entering the Galwan area. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that there is from the Chinese point of view, they are using this at every stage. And our people, that's my whole point, that our people are not being forthcoming.
But the main point I want to confirm is that you stand by what you've written in your book on page 24, that perhaps over 150 were injured and perhaps 100 taken captive by the Chinese. And you believe that the captives included a lieutenant colonel and 3 majors. That's on page 24 of your book.
I've seen that.
You stand by that.
I stand by that. But as I said, that these are figures which are collected through various sources. There's no direct sources. And the prisoners, I'm now fairly certain. About the number of prisoners, over 100, yes. I'm quite certain about that, that had happened. The deaths are known. Injured, I mean, say it could be 100, 150. True. The ranks of these officers, again, I'm not that certain, but there is definitely, as I said recently, an officer has been put on a video confessing to his actions.
Okay. Now you say pictures and videos released by the Chinese in October 2021, that's just 14 months ago, show that the Indian soldiers had been armed. These arms were never used. Was this wise restraint on the part of the Indian soldiers, or was it inexplicable?
It's inexplicable, because if they had, because these pictures, now this is the whole point. When you come across stuff on the Weibo, it's a question of how credible it is. But to me, those pictures look genuine and those arms looked genuine. Now, and if I recall, the foreign minister also at one point had made that remark back in 2020 that the Indian soldiers were indeed armed. They were armed. Now, they didn't use those arms given the shock and confusion and the chaos in the dark. Meaning, who were you shooting at in Galwan? At that time, maybe that was the factor. Maybe their officers were not able to adequately rally them to some place where they could have then utilized those arms. But yes, the arms were there as per these pictures, and these pictures have not been denied by the Indian side.
And you also say your personal view is that it's inexplicable that arms weren't used.
Absolutely, because I think that if your life is threatened, and you do happen to have a gun, you use the gun.
Now, there's one more point you make, and this is the last question I'll ask you. You say of the 20 Indian soldiers who died at Galwan, 17 died of hypothermia. In other words, it wasn't the injuries inflicted by the Chinese that killed them, but the cold. Could these 17 have been saved?
Well, the Indian press statement on Tuesday afternoon, the next day. See, initially they said that a colonel and 2 soldiers had died on Tuesday morning. Okay. Later in the day, they said 17 had been critically injured and died of exposure. So it's a government statement. which is saying that they died of exposure. And in the course, by the end of the day, they acknowledged that 20 people had been killed. So it's a reading of the official statement of Tuesday night.
Could they have been saved? Could they have been saved?
Now, that is the Chinese, the editor of Global Times, Hu Shijin, mocked India, said that you don't have enough field medicos. But I'm not so sure. But yes, of course, they could, if they were injured and it was just hypothermia, if you had medics, military, all armies, they deal with this kind of trauma on the battlefield. I suppose they could have been saved. Why not?
Okay, Manoj Joshi. My last question, because people will be asking themselves, do you stand by everything we've discussed? Starting with the complacency of the army, the failure to assess intelligence, the fact that claiming Depsang is a legacy issue clearly is not the case, as well as the account you've given, graphic and detailed, about Galwan on the 15th of June. Do you stand by all of that? Because you will be questioned, you will be challenged. No doubt people in the army will criticize you and say it's not true. No doubt the government will as well. So do you stand by everything you said?
Of course. But, Karan, I must point out, this book is not written by some divine information. This is information which is already out there. All of it is footnoted. There are endnotes there. There are Indian correspondents, Sushant Singh, Manu Pabbi, Dinakar Peri, defense correspondents who have reported on this, Shivarud,
Yes.
So all these people, I based my account on their reports.
In other words,
it's all out there.
You've based everything you've told me in this interview on reports that are there. You simply collated and put them together.
Yes, absolutely.
But I take it you've also based this, particularly your account of Galwan on the 15th of June, on things that you've been told directly and personally yourself.
The one part, the prisoners part, that is something which I needed some confirmation because, the New York Times had reported that there were some prisoners. They hadn't given numbers. So the numbers I confirmed were over 100.
And you got information from sources about that?
Sources within, yes.
Okay, Manoj Joshi, thank you very much indeed for this interview. It's the first time that we've had a detailed graphic account of what happened in Galwan on the 15th of June 2020, but it's also the first formal confirmation about the Army's complacency and failure to assess intelligence, which could have meant a very different outcome if the Army had actually assessed what it was already told about. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.